This is the Nobel Podcast, where we talk about how to optimize your technology, life, and mind. We're joined by special operations veterans, entrepreneurs, investors, and others who have overcome difficulty to make it to the top of their craft by staying in the fight. All right, let's rock and roll. So, what is your name?
Tim Fallon.
Where did you grow up, Tim?
In Long Valley, New Jersey, which is in northern New Jersey, like up in the Watchung Mountains, so more in the west of the state.
Were you troublesome as a kid? Did you get into a lot of trouble?
No, I wasn't really. I think, pretty easy to manage. Maybe my parents would disagree, but, there was never any flashing blue lights involved.
What did you do? Did you do sports, hobbies? What was it like?
I did some sports, but mostly track and field and golf and stuff. I never really did the heavy hitting sports like lacrosse and football and such. I think that was, I just didn't really want to give up my summer, especially for football. Once I heard they had to show up in August, I was like, well, I'm not doing that.
Right. So, what was the earliest age you had in your mind when you wanted to join the Marine Corps?
It was always a part of our family. So my grandfather was in the 82nd Airborne, and then my uncle was in the Marine Corps. Seeing all the military equipment and all that stuff when I was a little kid, so I always thought that was great. I think really what brought it from being something that was foggy to something that I really wanted to do was 9/11, right? And of course, a lot of people say that, but I'm just from northern New Jersey. And I was in ninth grade when 9/11 happened, and the teachers came into the room and said a plane struck one of the Twin Towers, and no one really knew what that meant. I was like, well, who cares if a Cessna hit a big building? I guess that's weird, right? But then we got news that the second time the plane had hit, and then obviously it was a terrorist attack at that point. And I remember going to the school library, and they had up on the screens the CNN reporting. And both buildings were smoking at that point, and I was in the room for 3 minutes or so. And that's when the second tower actually fell. And there was just a groan went up from the crowd that was just watching. I've never forgotten that. And that always that drove me onward, I really think. It was always in the back of my head. And of course, I went on with high school, of course, and I went to college, and I didn't do ROTC or anything, but it was always there in the back of my head, that groan and my history. And then eventually I just knew that's what I wanted to do.
So your grandfather and uncle, was your grandfather World War II era, Korea era?
No, he was Korea era, and that was something he always regretted. He was in the 82nd, right? So they sat on the East Coast to keep the Russians still, right? While everyone else went off and fought in Korea. He was always angry at that for his whole life, that he had never seen combat, never got to be deployed.
Right. What about your uncle, Marine Corps? Is he Vietnam?
No, he was the 80s, so he was Panama. That was his big show, and then he was also in Gulf War in the North. He was an infantry guy.
So you chose the Marine Corps. Remember 9/11 in ninth grade. You felt what you felt. Why did you pick the Marine Corps, which is often the most advanced combat arms? And then why did you pick infantry Marine Corps on top of it?
So my older brother was actually and still is in the Marine Corps, and he was an infantry guy, so I couldn't be outdone, right? So, so I definitely had to do Marines, and I definitely had to do infantry, but it was my uncle was in the Marines, so I wanted to join for that reason, and it was starting to become a family tradition. And in the infantry, I never joined the military with the intention of making a career. It was always I wanted to go and do what I need to do for my country, be part of retribution to a certain extent. But I wanted to go where the fighting happened, right? I wanted to be at the tip of the spear. I wanted to be actually on the ground and swinging blows, right? So it was always infantry. I remember walking into the OSO's office, the Officer Selection Officer's office, and they said, "Would you like to do that?" And they pointed at a picture of an Apache. I guess it was a Cobra, actually, because the Marine Corps is poor and only has Cobras, and it looked really cool. It was a great photo, but I was like, no, that's not what I want to do. I want to get out there and really do the real work.
I've heard a lot of people say, a lot of different reasons. I usually say revenge. And I think that kind of, there's something weird about that, where that draws an emotion out of people. So retribution, which is more or less the same thing. I respect it. But I also was an East Coast guy, so I could see the World Trade Center from my school as well. So
yeah, and we were close enough. We had plenty of kids. Their parents worked in New York. There's one family that lost someone that day, one of the kids in the school. So yeah, it was definitely close. So yeah, there definitely was that measured thought of retribution.
So you did that. You picked Marine Corps infantry. You obviously got your degree. What made you go the officer path instead of enlisted? What was your thought process?
Like I said, I went through high school, I went through college, and I didn't do RTC. But when I got to the end, I realized I really wanted to make sure I joined the military and got into the fight. But part of it was also, well, shit, I don't want to sit behind a desk. I want to go and do something interesting. My whole family had been officers before, and I just finished college, right? So I thought, well, I'll get paid a little bit more, and also, I'll be able to lead a platoon and all this other stuff. So, maybe in retrospect, if I could, if I hindsight 2020 and all that stuff, maybe I would have enjoyed being enlisted more, because I did enjoy the actually getting into a fight and actually learning a specific skill. But at the same time, I really did enjoy the leadership challenge of being a 22-year-old in charge of 80 people and millions of dollars worth of gear in a life and death mission.
You didn't do ROTC. You didn't do the academy. You did, I guess, OCS. Was that just like a sledgehammer welcome to the Marine Corps?
It was. So it was a 10-week program. So I graduated college, and then within weeks I was in Quantico. And actually, I graduated in December. So I graduated a semester ahead of the rest of my class. So while everyone else in my class had their last semester of college, and they were drinking their faces off, I was freezing to death in Quantico. It was not what I expected. My family, it was all military. So, and I'd read books, I'd seen movies and stuff, but it was not what I was expecting. It was definitely more intense, but I can't say that I enjoyed it. I was glad when it was over.
I guess you got into the infantry. Did you deploy soon after, or was there like a workup period involved?
It was very, very rapid for me. So I did OCS, then went to TBS, the basic school in Quantico, and that was 6 months. Then did IOC, the infantry officers course in Quantico. That was 3 months. So that took about a year. And then deployed to my unit. They were just coming back from a small deployment in the Caribbean, which, was tough.
Sounds terrible.
Yeah. They had to do a lot of, island work. But anyway, so we went right into the training for Afghanistan. And so I showed up in January, and by July, we were in Afghanistan. It was very, very quick. My entire Marine Corps experience.
This was a deployment you were wounded on, right?
Yeah.
2 deployments.
Yeah, I just had I just had the one deployment, actually.
So basically, you were in Afghanistan, and then I'm going to read what I got from online. Correct me where I was wrong, but basically, Tim Fallon was commanding a rifle platoon of 60 Marines and 20 Afghan soldiers in Helmand Province, sweeping for mines in November 2010. And you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, so we were in Marja on the northwest side of the city. There's a little place called Kari Sidi, and Fox Company. That's who I was with. 29 Fox Company. We had that whole basically north side of the city, and I had the northwest side. And it was basically 16 square kilometers, and it was just mine, right? And so each platoon had a bunch of land, but it was just mine. I had a little patrol base, and we were pretty far away from the company HQ. We were pretty far away from the battalion HQ. So I was living the second lieutenant's dream, right? I was handed a piece of land. I was handed lots of weapons and told to go do something. It was a pretty bad neighborhood, right? So we were doing the clear hold build stuff, obviously. And we were very much stuck in clear. And we had a decent sized enemy unit that was fighting us every day.
Do you know what they were? The Al Qaeda, Taliban?
They were Taliban or Taliban associates of some sort. And really it was just going out every day and waiting to get ambushed, because that's how we started the fight every single day, because we had too much gear on, like all Americans. So it was just waiting for them to ambush us, and then the fight would begin. This was day after day after day. And then that was every day. And then every night was we owned the territory, right? And they would put in their IEDs at night. But other than that, they wouldn't touch us, because they couldn't survive an at-night fight with us. So in this particular case, so about 4 months in, we had really good intel from a local that they had put some IEDs really, really close to our patrol base, which, was unacceptable. And I had just gotten back from the company HQ. I had gone up there to do some admin stuff, because even in combat, the admin never stops. So I just gotten back and had gotten the intel. So we went out, pushed out a small patrol, and the Afghan lieutenant, Ahmad Ad-Din was his name. He was a good dude, really, really, really strong guy, mentally and physically. He went out with me, and we were in this tree line, and he set the device off. I was standing right next to him, and it blew him really badly. Lost 3 limbs laying on the deck, and then I was just blasted as well, and I had lost my sight, and I was just fell into the ditch behind me.
So from what I remember in the article, it said you were still able to radio in after you'd already been basically exploded.
Yeah, so I
How is that even possible?
Well, I turned to my green gear and started to put in the because, you know where the button is. You don't need to look at the damn thing, right? So I turned to my green gear, went to report it, but the green gear was shattered, and that was dead. The green gear being one of my radios. So I had black gear, which is the more local radio, usually not encrypted, and I was able to use that to relay my medevac report to my patrol base and get the helos moving on us.
So you and the Afghan counterpart lieutenant got blown up, and then you called in your own missed report over the radio.
Yes. I used my night patrols as chances for my really young guys to lead patrols. And when things went south, I decided to put in my own reports.
I don't know if I'd be able to do that.
You say that, right? But this is all in front of me. It's like, well, this is what I need to be doing right now because things went very dark, and I'm going to need help real quick.
Did your memory go from that moment in the ditch to Walter Reed, or do you remember quite a bit in between?
I remember some in between. So what happened was the bomb went off, right? The ID goes off, but it was like the lights went out. It was just like, it wasn't gradual, it wasn't bloody. It was just like someone turned off the lights in the world. And then I heard felt a heat wave, and then I heard a blast, right? Like, at least in my memory, who knows that's true, right? But in my memory, there was 3 distinct things happened. Then I found myself on the ground and put in the misreport, right? But I never lost consciousness. The ID was basically directly under me, but they buried it way too deep. So the dirt absorbed most of it, and what kinetic energy went straight up, and I just kind of got peeled off on the edge, right? And everything went up my chest and blew my helmet and my glasses off, and obviously perforated my eyes. So I call in the misreport. We get the LZ established. A bird comes in, and I got thrown onto the Black Hawk, and then I went over to a Leatherneck. And actually, it was the British medical folks who were there who got me off of the helo. And I was wide awake. I had never lost consciousness, but they got me into a room, I guess, and they said, "Hey, you're gonna feel a prick, and then we'll be talking a little bit later." And I remember saying, "Okay," and then I woke up days later. And it was because my eyes were in such bad shape, and at that time, it just happened to be there wasn't good enough ophthalmology support in theater or even in Germany at that time because of how poorly my eyes were doing. So they decided to put me into a medically induced coma and just get me straight back to Reed before they did anything.
So when I read this part, I was kind of blown away. It said that when you woke up in Walter Reed, they gave you a whiteboard and you scribbled on it, "My Marines?" ?
Yeah.
That's like something from a movie that gave me the goosebumps when I read it.
I don't remember too much of those days. I was still pretty high on whatever they used to get you into a medically induced coma. And because of that, I had a tracheotomy, so I couldn't talk either. So, they gave me a whiteboard to communicate because the trach was still in. I was just furious at myself, furious at the whole situation because I was gone. I was gone from the unit that I loved, the work that I'd been doing that I was really enjoying. But I remember that was the first thing I was thinking about was how was Ahmad, how are the rest of the Marines? And then, like I said, it was a tough neighborhood. So I was worried that, things that happened while I was asleep. And I wanted to know.
I want to keep quoting you because it's too good. The quote you had was basically, "I was literally the first blind person I ever met." And you tell yourself, you're not the only one who is in a situation in war where they got blown up and hurt. Millions of people have done it in the course of history, and unfortunately, millions more will do it again. So you just get over it and get through it. It's a little bit of, what choice do I have? You can sit in your house and watch TV or listen to audiobooks, or you can go out and get a job and keep doing the things you used to do in a modified fashion. So that is like, I love the ancient Stoics. If like Epictetus or Seneca were here, that's what they would say. So tell me about that kind of inner dialogue. Was there a moment where you doubted that, or was it just straight up, bring it on, I'm going to crush this?
There were many moments of doubt, right? But I was always hitting myself with that, like over and over again. So this isn't unique what happened to you. This has happened to tons of other people, so you can survive it, right? I really was the first blind person I'd ever met, right? Before that, maybe I knew Homer, right? Ray Charles. I knew of them,
good
right?
company.
So I literally knew no one. And so I had no idea how things worked. I knew about Braille, I didn't know how to work, knew about guide dogs, didn't know anything else. Knew the blind people had white canes, but didn't know anything else. So it was a tremendous amount of learning. In many ways, it was good, right? Because that helped me survive it by focusing on the tactical every day. Like I got to learn, I got to figure out how to get out of this room. I got to figure out how to not walk into the women's room. I need to figure out, I keep hitting my head because I'm not good at using a white cane. I really need to get a freaking dog, right? That really did help me over the years, was always reminding myself that I wasn't unique. This wasn't something brand new and that was incapable of being done and overcome, right? Other people have done this, so I can do this too.
In a crazy way, it's almost like joining like an ancient human club. 'Cause wounded warriors have been their own separate unit in society for as long as we've had societies. It's an interesting experience, and it's interesting that you're related with those people automatically.
Yeah, there's been a lot of them, right? And everyone, you can read about this in some of a lot of wounded Roman soldiers when they retire back to Iberia, positions that they held in their society, right? This has been happening for a long time, so I didn't have to invent the book, right? And that was good.
So I want to talk about your relationship with your dog. So like a lot of people have dogs. I love my dog, my best friend in the world. I'd assume you have a different relationship with your dog because like whereas most people have dogs for the emotional connection, you have your dog for emotional, but also that's your guide, like in more ways than one. Can you talk about the relationship, what that's like?
Yeah, it's it's very, very interesting in that it was not something I'd ever expected to do, right? It wasn't what I expected at all. I kind of expected that the dog would show up and it would show me where to go, right? And that was it. It turned out it's more like being married to the dog, right? Like it's constant negotiation, and usually I'm not in charge. And my current dog is my third dog. Her name's Beezy. My first one was Orson. My second one was Jupiter. And each one is very, very different. So every time you have a new dog, it's really starting over because they're an individual, right? They have their own personality and way of like viewing the world and dealing with things. So it's a good way of looking at it. Like remember when you come back from deployments and when you were just back, you'd be out in town without your M4 attached to you, right? Like, you just kind of felt naked. You didn't feel scared, right? Because you knew you were back in the States, right? But you still felt naked, right? Because that happens to me a lot with the dog, because the dog has become a tool. As much as the dog is a friend, the dog is a tool. And if I'm out without the dog, I really feel like I'm naked. Like my left hand, which is the dog hand I handle the dog with, I really need something to do. But at the same time, like you really get to know the dog, right? Because it's literally with you for 24/7 for years, and I know what the dog's thinking. The dog knows what I'm thinking, and once you guys are really,
what is that like when you say the dog knows what you're thinking? Generally, the dog knows what direction you want to go, knows to clear the street for you before you walk. Like, how does that communication work?
Well, it's funny. So the dogs, this is all a game, right? They don't really know that they're leading a blind guy around because otherwise they might quit, right? But they and some dogs do figure it out and they do quit on you. I've heard about other people funny stories like that, but the dog is all a game, right? So you have to keep them interested in it and you need to keep them working on it. But I'm blind as a bat, right? I can't see a damn thing, but I really do need to have a pretty good understanding of what's happening around me and where we are to give the dog direction and guidance, right? And he makes sure that we don't run into anything on the way. Like a good analogy is that it's like a pilot navigator relationship, right? Except that the dog does the piloting, right? But it has no idea where we're going or why we're going there. And all the dogs are really thinking about is food and squirrels and things like that. So you have to keep the dog on task, but you also be able to direct it to where to go. And it really requires a lot of concentration from both parties to get there successfully. But after a while, it just becomes second nature.
So I have a couple of things. Knowing you for a long time, our building, the first time that we sat down, which was a few years ago, because we had talked, because you had transitioned out and you were doing something else and we wanted to work together. And our building is 650,000 square feet. People get lost here. And I think that you took an Uber here. You didn't have somebody walk you to where you were going. And somehow you found yourself at our door, which is confusing that people who can see can't find our door. And I asked you a question about this. And like, how do you go about your life into places that you've never been before? How do you do that? How do you go to a city you've never been to before? You just came back from London and pretty much the whole team was saying we had to kind of keep up with Tim. And your answer, the first time I asked you, you used a Marine thing. I patrol the contact. And you're like, what is my other option? Sit on my ass all day?
Yeah.
And you don't do either one of those. So what's that like? How has that changed you from before to after? Because I don't see anything that's lazy and everything is kind of an adventure that you have to do. How do you face the patrol the contact and how do you keep the motor running?
Everything's a movement to contact, right? You have no idea what the hell you're about to run into. You just have to, be able to roll with the punches, be really flexible. And after a certain amount of time, you just get used to it, right? Like you guys are SEALs. You spend plenty of time in the dark, right? And you just get used to these things, and something extraordinary, something as an out of the ordinary, just becomes the norm, right? And then you can just deal with it.
What was that transition like early on? How did you evolve to that?
I've always been a very independent person, and I just hate being blind. It's pretty awful. I do. And so because I require people's help, whether that's an Uber driver or, figuring out where something is in a grocery store, till this day, I always have to keep my fury in check about that kind of stuff. But, in many ways, it's a good thing because from very early on, it forced me to get just to go out there because I couldn't wait an extra 5 minutes for someone to help me out or I just didn't want it. Right. And I've gotten horribly lost many, many times. I'm usually lost, in fact. And I've been in very interesting situations. For instance, I was once trying to walk down the street and there was a guy, he grabbed my arms. Hey man, let me help you out. I was like, dude, get away from me. And he's like, no, let me help you out. I was like, no, I really don't want your help. He said, look, I get that, man, but you're in the middle of the street. You're going to get hit by a car. And kind of how my thought has always been like, well, what's the worst that can happen, right? And especially when I got the dog, I can usually trust the dog to keep us from dying because the dog has a strong Darwinistic impulse too, right? It doesn't want to die either. So it usually keeps us from getting into too much trouble.
A Darwinist instinct. That's good.
So you also apparently figured out how to ski while blind. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I grew up skiing. I always loved skiing. And then, I don't know, a couple of years after I went blind, so I heard got blind skiing. I was like, that sounds like a terrible idea. I should do that. So I probably do this once a year, a couple of times a year. I really enjoy it, but it's also pretty terrifying, but I keep doing it anyway. But one of the things about it is that once you start going down the mountain, you're obviously on skis going over snow, and you can move very, very fast. I actually will put it this way. I usually have no concept of how fast I'm going when I'm going down the hill. I have no concept. All I have is this feeling of smooth movement, which I really enjoy, not being attached to a dog or a person or a vehicle and being able to move independently. But, that is the scary part is that I usually have no concept of how fast I'm going. And as a result, I don't know how far I've gone and when to turn to stay on the slope. So I've flown off slopes many, many times into the woods and all that stuff. But it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It's nice to be moving fast. And yeah, it's always a good excuse to get out.
So let's wrap up the military, I guess. Best and worst aspects of the military. I wonder, do you think that was the worst aspect of the military? Do you actually have a different answer than that?
No, the worst aspect of the military is the bureaucracy, the endless paperwork.
Yeah.
So the blindness is less than the bureaucracy.
Bureaucratic paperwork.
Yes, in my humble opinion. But you guys have been there. Being in the military is an incredible opportunity. The missions that you're doing, the stuff that you're learning, but especially as an officer, you just have this inbox and just never ever empty. And there's always more paperwork to be done.
You got a family history, military, 82nd Airborne, Marine Corps, Korea, Panama, yourself, Afghanistan. What would you say to someone interested in joining the military?
I would say you can do much better. And especially you can make a couple years of it. You can do a whole career, name a job. You can do it in the military. And that gives you that network and that experience and that pride after and during your time in the military. But one thing I do have said, to folks is like, remember that you're getting into something that's true, real, right? It's not a movie. It's not a book. You can be maimed. You can be killed. You can know people that can be maimed, that can be killed. So if someone's going to ask me if they should join the military, I'd generally say yes, right? But know that what you're getting into is real.
So you have a family, you have wife and kids.
Yes.
Were you married at the time?
No, I was not. I pulled a typical E3 and proposed to my wife, my then fiance, and then went on, then got on a plane and went to Afghanistan.
Tell me about what that experience was like for, I guess, your fiance at the time. And then knowing that you went through this, now you have kids. Now the fruits of life you get to enjoy.
I don't know how she got through it, to be honest. I think that in many ways it's more put on the family members and especially her, the fiance, because at least I had the concentration of, I got to get better, right? I have to learn things and so on and so forth. But her, she's sitting on the side of it and can't control it as much. But I couldn't have done better in life with her because I'll give you a story. When I was in Walter Reed, we were in the hospital room. I'd been there for a few days at this point. And I said to her, I'm thirsty, right? And she said, okay, is there water in here? She said, yeah, it's over by the sink. I was like, oh, can you get me some? She said, no, you can go get it.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, well, shit, that's gonna okay. So she really did force me down the road toward getting better, right? And it really has, and it's been like that ever since, right? And she's always been pushing me to be a better person, be the most I can be, right? And so there were dark times where I got through because of her, and so obviously we got married and have kids now, and that's been really interesting. I love having kids, but one interesting thing about being blind and having kids is that I have no choice but to give these kids enormous amounts of freedom, like to be outside and stuff. I literally had the choice of putting my kids on a leash, like literally a leash when they were little, or teaching them and trusting them to stay on the sidewalk, right? And to my mind, I wasn't going to put a kid on a leash. That's not I don't think, good precedent to set in the kid's life, right? So from an early age, these kids have been able to had enormous amounts of freedom, and I think they've learned a lot from that. But also, it's made me, trust them, right? I have to do a lot of pre-plan. I have to do a lot of thinking about where we're going, what that situation is going to be like, and so on. But making sure that my kids are part of that, right? And we're thinking about this together because dad can't see a damn thing, and might need your help, or dad might get lost or whatever. I think it's also funny because what's the old joke about the second lieutenant who's always getting lost? Well, that's me for life, right? I'm always wandering off in some direction.
How old are your kids now?
My oldest, he's a boy. He's 10 years old, and then I got 2 girls, 7 and 5.
Do they ever mess with you? No, they can get away
constantly. Yeah, no, they are not. They're not dumb. They know exactly what dad can and can't do. So, well, I think that there's often extra desserts taken. There's often no, dad doesn't know what I'm doing, so I'll go do what I want and that kind of stuff. But they also don't realize I know more about what they're doing than they think I know.
Right. They'll figure it out 20 years from now. So you knew you weren't going to do a career when you went in. What were you intending to do when you got out? And is that what you ended up doing anyway?
I had no plans beyond the Marine Corps. I didn't want to make a career of it, just did for various reasons. And I kind of wanted to get out in the world, but no. So yeah, but to answer your question, no, it wasn't nothing I did was what I kind of intended to do past the Marine Corps. So after I was wounded, I went to Walter Reed, and I was, at that time, the Marine Corps was offering you the chance, hey, even if you're wounded, badly wounded, we will find you a place in the Marine Corps if you wish to stay. And I kind of thought about it, but at the end of the day, it was, if I can't lead a Marine Corps platoon in combat, like, I don't want to do this anymore, right? So I got out and had no idea what I wanted to do, and they treat you very well as a new wounded warrior, trying to help you out and just give you options, give you help. So one guy offered me, hey, would you like a top secret clearance? I was like, well, that sounds cool, right? So I got clearance, and I went over and had a short internship with NIM East Asia, so National Intelligence Manager for East Asia, over at DNI, National Intelligence, right, Director of National Intelligence. And then I was able to go from there. I was able to jump over to DIA, and I was doing economics and fiscal kind of work for DIA for 9 years, and did that in DC and did that in England. And then I ended up jumping ship. I kind of got a little burnt out on the government side of the house. Just kind of wanted to see the rest of the world. So went over to Deloitte for a year, and then a spot opened here at ZeroEyes. I've been here ever since.
Typically, when we talk about transition from the military, it's like the psychological difficulty of going from a military culture to a civilian culture. And you had obviously even more going on with the physical. Did you have a difficult transition as well, adapting to like the DIA and then to Deloitte, which is as opposite military as it gets?
Yes and no, right? And that, like I said, the military and the Marine Corps in particular treats the wounded really, really well, and bends over backwards on them. So I had so much help during the transition for finding out what I wanted to do next, and getting help and resources and direction, so on and so forth. But for years, I didn't transition well on the, I don't know, do you want to call it psychological side of the house? Just because my deployment ended so abruptly, right?
Yeah.
And literally 3 days later, I was in Walter Reed after getting hit. It took me years just kind of to get over that sudden ending, right? And that did really make the transition pretty difficult. But I was able to do good work and felt good with the work I was doing over at DIA. That was a good place to kind of do that.
Do you have advice? Let's say other people who are in the military, maybe thinking about transitioning out, or even people who just transitioned out. What advice would you give them as to finding meaningful work? You mentioned being of service.
One thing after the military was that I always wanted to find work that meant something. That was really important to me, because that was what I really enjoyed about the military, was the leadership aspect and having work that, when you got up in the morning, you knew you were doing something. And especially when you're transitioning, maybe that would be my advice to folks, is at least for the first job or two, make sure that you're doing that kind of work, and it'll scratch that itch and make it easier to get out of bed in the morning.
What about getting yourself ready to crush the day? Do you have a routine, a ritual? Are there like three or four or five things you do to get yourself amped up and crushing?
Yeah, I get up, and the first thing I do, I just go down and PT, so work out. And
what does that look like? What's your PT?
So I mostly do rowing nowadays. So I have an erg in my basement, and so I go downstairs and punish myself there for a while.
All right. So what does your row workouts look like? Are you doing high intensity zone 5? Are you doing zone 2, or just what are you doing?
I like to use it as time to zone out almost. I don't like to have any music on. I don't like to listen to anything, and I'll just I'll just sit and do it.
So just your heart rate, you're at peace with yourself, kind of thing.
Yeah, or wondering why the hell I'm doing this,
or with yourself.
but yeah, no, and that's part of my morning routine, is just to be able to get that done. But have some time that I'm not concentrating on anything, nothing to do with work, nothing to do with things I need to do around the house, just on something in the immediate now, which is to keep pulling on this.
I like training. I like training hard, like zone 5, max heart rate in silence, because of the stuff that comes up in the mind. Typically for me, it's things that have to be worked through. And then when the thing that has to be worked through is met with a 95% max heart rate, it gets worked through in about a fraction of a second. It's like meditation for me. Is that what goes through your head, or like problems? Do problems arise inside of your head the higher your heart rate gets, and you kind of hammer them out this way? Is it almost therapeutic for you, or is something else going on?
Now that I say that, I never really noticed the connection there, but yeah, maybe it is that. But I like to think about problems while I'm on the erg or something, because I just, for whatever reason, I feel I'm able to think more outside the box and really just come up with conclusions.
The most important question: what is your 2K time?
My 2K time is 6:52.
Oh my God, that has to hurt.
Yeah, I'm trying to get it further down though.
Sub 7 is the standard, I think, for the row erg, I think. So morning routine, you do that, you crush a row. What do you do after that to get ready?
And then I stagger upstairs and drink coffee and work until the kids get up. Then they're in charge for a while.
What about end of the day? How do you pivot away from work mode? Do you have a routine and a ritual to be there with your family?
I do. I've gotten pretty good about that. And honestly, part of it helped when I was with DIA, right? When you went home, it was literally illegal to take work home, right? So when you got home, it was all family and all the other stuff you do, right? Like, I'm in the habit of it, and here I've been pretty good about trying to stay with that as the kids grow and as I have more and more work pile up, which is a good thing. Toward the end of the day, my youngest will come in and she's like, "Dad, are you almost done with work?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm almost done." And then 15 minutes will go down by, "Dad, are you almost done with work?" "Yeah, I'm almost done." And then eventually she'll just crawl onto the chair and, just sit in front of me until it's okay. I guess I'm done now. And close the laptop and leave the cell phone in there.
You get a lot of work done in a short period of time. How do you get your best work done? How do you get into a flow state?
The best way for me to do that is just to lock myself in a room, and then I put on some music, and then I can just stare at it and really just zone out into it.
How do you process information? So I see you do it, but I'd like you to explain through. Just like, I get in the zone and I stare, but you're not staring, you're listening. So
Yeah,
how do you go through spreadsheets? Describe what that process is and how you learned it. How do you go through an Excel spreadsheet?
Well, maybe counterintuitively, but spreadsheets are actually the easiest thing for blind people to use, because everything's in a discrete cell, right? And so it's really easy to navigate it and get an understanding of what's in there. So how I use computers, I use machines. I use a screen reader, which is what it sounds like, right? A good rule of thumb is if you can highlight it with your mouse, I can read it with my screen reader. Although OCR capabilities have taken off dramatically over the past 5 years, even, so that's even not really a rule of thumb anymore. But I just had to relearn how I dealt with computers, right? And it can be very clunky at times because basically a screen reader sits on top of a GUI, which talks to the operating system, right? So you're still trying to deal with everything through a GUI interface, right? But just with the audio input and cues instead of visual ones. But you get it after a while, and I'm just able to, over the years, that's what the program looks like to me, so to speak, right? Is all these audio cues and then all these keyboard commands that I use to integrate with it, and you just get used to it. And as the things that it's the same as staring, really, in terms of what I'm doing mentally, right? I'm just able to just drown deep in the data and what I'm actually working on, but it's all just visual audio.
What about, just two fun questions? Do you have a couple books that have changed your life?
Yeah, my favorite book in the world is Master and Commander.
I didn't know it was a book. I only know the movie.
It's a series.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's like 20 books or something.
It's a fiction series or like a nonfiction series?
No, it's fiction.
It's fiction.
Wow.
It's a big series, yeah.
I've loved that movie.
They're all really good, but the first one is outstanding. And it's what I explain to people is Jane Austen with canon, right? Because it's as good as her writing, I would say, and it's her witticism is that era, and really Patrick O'Brien, the author, does a great job of commanding the people and the history and the language of that era. But then there's canon, so it's just awesome, right? So that's my favorite book, and I've probably read it once a year. The Sun Also Rises by Hemingway.
Nice.
And I've always loved that book. Even on first time I read it was in high school. But when I showed up at my patrol base McKelney and Marja, we were ripping out with 3.6, there was this hopelessly tattered copy of it there. And I picked it up and just read it while I was there. And it's always stuck with me ever since, that the character in there, he suffered great wounds, and I think his was worse than mine, quite frankly. That's always stuck with me, especially when the scene where he goes fishing in Spain. Ever since being, blinded by self, I've often come back to that. Like, well, he was still able to find peace and something that he loved in the fishing, right? He was able to go down to the tactical level, as we might say, and really just enjoy that process, right? And be able to forget what happened to him. I've found that with woodworking and with kayaking and some other things I really enjoy, just to put myself deep inside of that. And then, I can for a long time forget about the world.
There's a similar vibe between the Master and Commander book and then the Hemingway book. What would like a third book be along the same lines or something radically different?
You know what? This is going to be, again, military nerdy, but I like Clausewitz. I like reading On War. There's so much in that, and it's one of those books that's often quoted and seldom read. And there's so much more to that book than some stuff that people put up on a whiteboard in front of a military class about friction, right? And there's so much more than being pulled out of that, and I do enjoy reading that and rereading that from time to time.
One time, a guy described how he controls an air stack as a symphony. That he's controlling a symphony and he doesn't know when it's there, but it's all in his head. So he listens to it and it's all auditory. And I thought that was kind of like a beautiful description on how you do that. There is this idea that your senses probably increase more than others in terms of that. Do you feel that it's more increased, or there's just a focus there?
I think it's just the focus. I mean, apparently medically, your other senses don't actually improve. You just pay attention to them more, right? Because, I don't have vision, right? So I'm much more keen on actually listening or paying attention to the smells that I'm getting and so on. So those all become important cues because, I've lost the visual one.
Do you notice that difference, or it's just such a different world to view and a way to take things in?
If I think about it, I notice it, right? But, at this point, it's been, 13 years. So I don't even notice it. I have to make myself think about it. But otherwise, it's just the day to day.
So spatially, when you're in a room, are you thinking about how big this room is, where you are, or it's just one of those things that either comes to you or don't, and you're not that concerned with it?
A little bit of both, in that, I'm listening for echoes, like how much does the room echo, right? And then when you pass from a hallway into a large room, a lot of times you can feel that in your ears, right? So, I'm trying to feel for pressure changes and that kind of thing, and changes in wind, or air moving in a room can tell you how big it is and all that kind of stuff. To a large degree, it usually doesn't matter how big or small the room is unless I'm looking for something in particular. So yeah, I'm cognizant of these guys as I go, but unless I'm trying to understand that environment for a particular reason, I kind of don't really pay attention to that.
When you dream, do you see?
I do, yeah. I do, yeah. And It's funny, like I'll dream with my kids in a dream, right? And they'll be kind of given faces that I can't actually recall, and I wake up, right? But it's funny that things that happen to me, when I'm dreaming, or even in memory, of like false memories of visualizations from an event, right? But it's all just made up.
Does that bother you? Like when you wake up, like, is that unnerving or is it beautiful?
I often find myself trying to recapture that, like, oh man, what did Jake look like in that dream? But most of the time, it just fades away so quickly.
Now, going blind later in life, having all that experience, do you think like that is better or worse? I mean, you remember what seeing is.
Yeah, I had 22 years of vision, and I'm very much grateful for that. I know what the world looks like, right? When people are describing things to me, I can visualize it very, very quickly and easily.
The other thing I just want to talk about and touch on is the transition and how maybe I perceive your transition from Deloitte to us, because we were talking for a while and we didn't necessarily have the ability to hire you right away. And we knew how extraordinary you were. And we thought, for Sam, I'll speak on me, but coming together and working with veterans showed meaning to me, because let's say you go through your life and you're depressed or whatever it is, that I felt like I was working at a big company. I was working at Amazon and it was depressed. It didn't fulfill the need for a mission greater than myself. And I needed to do it with other people who were in the military. It turns out like that meant a lot to me, and how I treated the world and how I saw the world. When we saw you at Deloitte, I don't think that you were unhappy necessarily, but I think iron sharpens iron and we sharpen each other. And it's awesome to be with veterans to do that. Is it better when people kind of poke at you rather than like, oh, don't say he's blind?
Oh, yeah.
Like what was that like there versus here, would be like, whatever it is, that the military maybe is crass in a way, but maybe sometimes that crassness is helpful.
Oh, it definitely is. I didn't hate Deloitte. I didn't, but I certainly didn't love it. There was really good people there, but there was no mission, right? We're just checking boxes, right? And hitting wickets. Coming here, I really felt like I was coming home, and I didn't realize I had been away from home, until I was actually sitting down here. So holy shit, like these are real people again, and we got a real mission again. And it was good to be with people that were willing to poke at me, because I like that, like I'm the first one to tell blind jokes, right? How do you break up a fight between two blind guys and they're having a fist fight, right?
How do you do that?
How do you break it up? You yell, my money's on the guy with the knife, right? So, but this is part of how I cope with these things, right? Is I just love humor, right? To give you an example, I used to at Deloitte in some meetings, I would sometimes tell these kind of jokes, not one that bad, but I'd tell these kind of jokes. I'd make fun of myself, right? And so it made some people very uncomfortable, right? But it was good to be back here where people were willing to make fun of me for being blind, because that's good. It really is. It treating me like a human instead of like a victim, right? Which I really like. And it reminded me of one of my best friends from the military. When he found out that I was taking the subway to work in DC, he would text me these horrible things because he wanted he knew my cell phone would read it out loud. Right. He wanted me to get beat up. Right. No, he just thought that was funny, right? Well, I thought it was funny too, right? But again, I like being treated like a human especially by former military people, because they've been through this, right? And they know what it means, right? Instead of being treated like a victim.
Have you ever really run into a situation where perhaps someone did not recognize you as being blind at something and maybe said something, like as you're walking through the middle of the street or something like that, where it was like one of those funny situations, like, what are you, blind? Like, yeah, I totally. And like, were you just like stuck the dagger into them real hard?
I've been tempted to. I'm usually pretty polite about that stuff, but it actually happens to me quite a bit, right? So actually, that just happened to me the other day. I was at a store. I was like, oh, where's I was actually at a beer store. It's like, well, I'm looking for this particular beer. Where is it? So it's over there. Over here? And I'm pointing in some random direction because I was just looking for better. So no, over there. I was like, oh, well, I can't see. I'm blind. You can't see. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. But and he was perfectly fine or whatever. But that happens to me a lot, actually. And I guess I've been told it's I just move confidently, right? Which I don't know if that's because am I confident in my movements, or if I just don't really care about smashing my head anymore. But I just move quickly and confidently, and a lot of people just don't realize.
We're honored that you're on our team.
Happy to be here. I'm honored to have been here.
Couldn't be more stoked. Appreciate it, Tim. Thanks, man.
Yeah, good to go.
That's it for this episode. If you want to check out more from the podcast, head to zeroeyes.com/nobel, where you can see show notes, read more about our guests, and suggest guests or topics of your own. Until next time, stay in the fight. Don't ring the bell.